Hi, I'm Marie. Welcome to my studio. Welcome to the second video for Pacific Design Studio. If you like what you see on here, if you like my style, refer to pacificdesignstudio.etsy.com and check out my products. Today I'm going to talk about what I paint with and what I paint on. So we're going to start first with brushes. I mostly use flat brushes because that's what I learned to paint with. Every brush that you use, like this is a filbert, this is a flat, this is a filbert, it's going to give you a different look. Every size difference is going to give you a different look. Every material difference will give you a different look. So some of it is just deciding what it is that you like to use. I use medium priced brushes, very inexpensive brushes, and I have one brush that the single brush that's about this size, this isn't it, but it's about this size, was $32. I can tell you that no matter what the price of the paintbrushes is, it will not make you paint better. You still have to have the skill, and the only way to get that is to do it, to practice, practice, practice. I hate to sound like a cliche, but it's true. Practice makes perfect. So I do a variety of flat brushes. I also have a dropper, a little medicine dropper, because sometimes I like to have a little puddle of water on my palette. I'll show you that in a minute. And I always have my trusty stylee, two different sizes of stylus. You can also dip, if this one isn't flat, this one is. If the end of your brush is fairly flat, you can dip it in paint and tap with it, but it is not as accurate as a stylus is. You can do a number of techniques with those as well. So paints, what kind of paints do I use? Mostly I use folk art, partially because that's what I started with, partially because of the thickness and the opacity. Those are what you're going to look for. If you don't care if it's opaque, then you don't have to go with the more expensive paint. So I use folk art. This one happens to be Waverly. These are not as opaque. They're a little bit runnier, but depending on what technique you're using, it may not matter at all. And then there are times when I use Artist Loft or cheap. Sometimes it depends on the color and what's available. I found that the cheap has a nice texture to it. It's very creamy. It's very opaque, but it's a little bit different than the folk art. Again, whatever you want to use is wonderful. You will find happiness with what things you choose. So what do I paint on? I paint on cardstock. I've started painting that cardstock. I paint on canvas. I love to paint on mat board, and then usually I'll either put a picture or a quote in there that I print up on the computer. I like doing that a lot. This is my workbook, and I have examples in here, so this is kind of a heavier gauge paper. I also paint on glass, plastic, metal, cloth, luggage, kind of a you name it, and I'll paint on it. I've told my husband if he doesn't move fast enough, I might paint on him. Hasn't happened yet, but there's always that possibility. Also in the tool department, I use this particular setup for a palette. This has, you can use foil plates in it. Again, this is what I started with, so this is what I'm used to. I also have a water bucket that is well used, very dirty. Sometimes, not very often, but sometimes I will use a palette knife, and I usually use it for mixing paint or dipping paint, especially out of this bottle. These bottles do not have a stopper. They don't squirt out. They just have a big round opening, and they're kind of messy because of that. So sometimes I'll dip this in and then add it to my palette piece. Again, whatever you want to use, popsicle stick, your fingers. Sometimes painting with your fingers can be fun. Sometimes I use a clear plastic lid like this is a palette, and I'll squirt some paint out. I especially do this if I'm base coating something, because then I can take this particular lid and then pitch it. I don't have to preserve it in any way or make it neat for any reason. I always have a light. I usually paint listening to music. That's one of the more fun things to do. As I told you before, I have a book that I keep examples in. I put down what I painted it with, what colors I used, and this is my own study book. So I'm actually working up different types of flowers, different compositions, anything I want to remember, anything I've done as I've painted, I might want to resketch it into here or repaint it into here, so that I know I have it and there's some reason why I did it that particular way. But it is a chronicle of what I've done. Considering I sell most everything else, it kind of goes out the door once it's painted. That's about it for my basic techniques of, or at least my basic tools of what I use for the types of paints that I use. If you have any questions, please list them down at the bottom and be sure to like. Thanks.